Hello audience, in this video I'm going to work on the magneto. I'm going to install the field coil assembly, recharge the magnets, set up the gap on it, and probably assemble a few other things on this engine. Now back when I assembled the engine for the truck, I didn't use any of this stuff on that, and I explained all the justifiable reasons I had why I didn't do that. And ever since then people have been commenting on that video like crazy. Why didn't you install the magneto? It's supposed to have a magneto. So before working on this, I'm going to go through my list of complaints all over again. Generally, I'm one for setting everything up exactly the way it was originally, but this is kind of an exception for a few reasons. First of all, even if you have all the parts and they're all in good condition, it still takes several days of adjusting to get all the shims just right, to get the gap just right, and get the height of the magnets just right. And you got to fuss with the crankshaft end play if it's not right on target. So you have to have a lot of patience for that. The biggest thing I don't like about these is there's not much of anything holding the coils of wire on, and if they detach, they can get tangled up in the magnets and lock up the engine. It's not very common, but it has happened, and it even happened to me once while I was on a tour. And after I figured it out, I had to take the transmission housing off in a parking lot, dig the wire out best I could, and reassemble it so I could drive home. Yeah, I don't easily forget something like that. And that's a big reason why I didn't use any of this with the truck, is because now driving it, I feel at peace knowing that at least this problem can't possibly happen. And now after saying all that, you may be wondering, why am I installing a magneto on this engine? Well, this is kind of a different story. The truck, I'm just throwing that together any old way to make it work. This car, I'm building more towards authenticity. I mean, it's not going to be a date-coded show car, but I do want it to represent a proper Model T. I want everything on it more or less to function the way it did originally, and this is a really big part of the characteristic of the Model T. Another reason is this is an earlier engine that's not made for a generator. It's going in an early car that shouldn't have one in the first place. The magneto is really the only electrical power source on the whole car. If this doesn't work, pretty much the only other thing I could do is, like I did before, just put a battery in it somewhere and recharge it once in a while. So it's easier to justify making this work. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is check the crankshaft end play. Now the main bearings are new, so it should be right on target. The book calls for about 2 thousandths to 4 thousandths. It's about 2.5, maybe 3 thousandths, which is good enough. And now the next thing to do would be to install the field coil assembly and set the gap between that and the flywheel, which is done with these little shims that go between it and the block. Now this normally takes all day, at least for me, because you gotta bolt it on, put the flywheel on, bolt that down, read the gap with a feeler gauge, make notes, take it all apart, adjust the shims, and just keep doing that till you get that right. Now I couldn't figure out how to film that and make it even the least bit interesting, so I didn't. I shimmed all of this off camera and now it's all good to go, so we can assemble it for good now. And here's the flywheel. Now I removed the transmission from it to make it easier to lift on and off. Now the screws have already been replaced. The height of the magnets has already been set. So we're going to leave it assembled throughout all this. So I bolted it down one more time to do a final check. Now Ford recommends a gap of anywhere between 25 to 40 thousandths, and they recommend the gap to be about 6 to 10 thousandths more at the bottom than the top. Now there is some debate among enthusiasts whether or not you should do that. Well, I say it's in the book, so I'm going to do it that way. So currently it's about 22 to 24 thousandths at the top and about 30 to 32 at the bottom. Now there may or may not be some run out with the crankshaft or maybe the flywheel, but to keep it consistent just in case, I set it up so every time I assembled this keyway and this shaft all point in the same direction as the number 1 and number 4 throws. I don't know if that was necessary or not, but it's not going to hurt. And the next thing I'm going to do is recharge the magnets, because this is as good a time for it as any. Now this is kind of a controversial topic because there's countless different ways and techniques that people use to recharge the magnets, and just about all of them will say it'll never work right unless you do it their way. But one thing pretty much everyone more or less agrees on is if each end of the magnets will hold at least 2 pounds, it's good enough to use. Roughly the weight of a cast iron piston. And right now, it's a bit weak. Yeah, it's trying, but it's just not enough. I've used a few different techniques over the years. One way is I borrowed somebody's magnet charger, took the magnets off and recharged them individually. Another way is I made a magnet charger from an article in the Vintage Ford, and they pretty much worked okay. But the best results I've had was the simplest way. We take the field coil assembly, set it on top of it, string a bunch of car batteries together, and then just zap it several times. And that's what I'm going to do. So the first thing we want to do is identify the polarity of the magnets, because we want to charge them in the same direction. Because if we try the opposite, we'll probably waste most of the energy discharging the magnets. Now, the most common way people do this is they use a compass to determine the polarity. But if you're like me, or you're too cheap to buy a compass, I made this. This is something else I got from the Vintage Ford. It's a nail on a piece of wire with a piece of string on it. And this piece of wire is actually aluminum welding wire, so it's not going to interfere with the magnetic force. And these magnets will either attract to one end of the nail or the other. So let's see. Okay, so that one, the tip of the nail is attracted to it. And then this one, the head of the nail. Now which is north and which is south, I'm not sure, but that doesn't matter, as long as we can tell the difference. Yep, pretty consistent. Okay, I've been doing this several times now and it's been very consistent. So I was going to mark these north and south, but I don't know which is really north or south, and I'm going to get confused with that. So I marked H for the nail head and T for the nail tip. So that's good to go. And next we're going to do the same thing with the field coil assembly. Now this doesn't naturally have a magnetic field, so the way to do this is to run electrical current through it. Now the way most people do it is they'll take a car battery or a battery charger, run the negative end to the ground, run the positive end to the post, But if you just hook it up directly like that, you only have a few seconds of work time before it starts burning the insulation and melting the solder and burning the skin off your fingers. So one way to avoid that I do is I wire a resistor in it, like a light bulb, like this is. So this can stay on for a long time and give us plenty of work time to figure it out. Alright, the magnetic force was pretty weak, probably because I had a resistor on it, but it was strong enough to get a steady reading, and I marked it the same way that I marked the flywheel. Now, when we put these together, we want to set each of these on top of one of the plates on the magnets, and we want to set them up opposite. So this one's an H, we want to set it on top of a magnet that's marked T, and opposite with this, and so on. I connected wires to this, and then I got the batteries out of just about every car I own, wired together in series, and we're just going to zap it momentarily with like turning the power on for about 1 to 2 seconds. And I wired in an old starter switch to keep the sparks contained, and the plan is we're just going to keep zapping it till it warms up, then let it sit until it cools off, and then just keep repeating it, and we'll see what happens. Okay, that made a difference because you can't get the field coil off of it. Well, that's definitely an improvement. And that's it. I'm done with this for now. The next step is to assemble the transmission and then bolt this down for good. But we're not ready for that yet, so I'm going to ignore it for now. Now we're going to install the timing cover. It's already been cleaned and ready to go, and some of you enthusiasts will be happy to know I finally got a timing cover alignment tool. So now we can have proper, even cylinder timing. Is it going to make that big of a difference? I don't know, we'll soon find out. But first we need to sort out the crankshaft seal. Now originally the crankshaft seal was felt, and this is what came with the gasket kit, just like original. Now I've used these several times, and more often than not they do work. If the nose on the crankshaft is out of round or pitted or it has a lot of backlash, that can cause trouble, but usually these work. Problem is when they don't work, you have a big mess. Now the engine in the truck, that's using a rope seal like what a Model A uses, and that's what I intended on using for this. I got this one from Lang's. However, there's a slight problem. The earlier engines have a different size groove for the seal. This was changed around, I think 1917, correct me if I'm wrong, and this is a lot smaller than the later ones. Now, I knew that when I bought these. Lang sells 2 different sets, one for the early style and one for the late. But they were out of the early style, so I bought these on purpose and hoped that I could force them to work. Which you can do with the felt seals. You can compress them to work in this. But that's not going to work. There's just no give to these. So another option is they have the one-piece modern seal. Now, these do a good job sealing. The big thing I don't like about these is they're one piece. Now, if you have to remove the timing cover, you have to move it forward because the camshaft goes through it. But the timing cover and the oil pan hold the seal captive on both sides, so with a one-piece seal you can't do that. The only way to remove the timing cover is to lift the engine off the oil pan, which I don't like. However, I've been thinking it over, and in spite of that problem, I decided I'm just going to use this anyway and hope I never need to take the timing cover off. Now there's a few little things to watch out for. First of all, it says right on the package 09 to 27, but it clearly doesn't fit the earlier style groove, so I'm going to have to trim a little bit off of it. And another important thing is even the inside seals against the crankshaft really well, but the outside is not the same size as the timing cover. It leaves a gap, which is not a problem. You can pack these with gasket sealer, wait for them to dry, and they work. But if you don't, oil's just going to run around it and make a big mess. And that's something you don't want to learn the hard way. New problem. The groove isn't big enough for the seal. Because the timing cover is setting a little bit too high, and force it down into place, it opens a gap at the bottom here. And it can't be forced in anymore. So that's not going to work. So I guess we're using the felt seal then. And just like what I did with the truck, I got a modern one-piece seal for the camshaft. And that's about as far as I can go with it for now. I'm still working on the cylinder head, but that's just about ready to go. The transmission can go on, but I don't want to do that till I get the oil pan back, which is out getting painted right now. When that comes back, we can assemble all that, and maybe even drop this in the car. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's it for now. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.